Perfectionism is not about high standards. It never was. And if you've spent years building your identity around the idea that you just care more, work harder, hold yourself to a higher bar than most people are willing to, this video is going to show you what was actually underneath that the whole time. Not to take anything away from what you've built, not to tell you the effort wasn't real, but because there is something happening underneath the standard, something that explains why clearing the bar never quite feels like enough. And until you see it clearly, the exhaustion doesn't go away. It just finds a new project. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the bar keeps moving. And that understanding is going to change what you do with it. Here is what perfectionism looks like from the inside. It looks like caring. It looks like being the person who actually finishes things, who doesn't cut corners, who notices the detail everyone else walked past. It looks like the standard you hold yourself to, and the quiet frustration you feel when the people around you don't hold themselves to the same one. For a long time, it probably felt like a strength. Maybe it still does some of the time. Because the results are real, the work is good, the projects get done, the bar gets cleared, and then something happens that is hard to explain to people who haven't felt it. The bar moves, not because you failed, not because the work wasn't good enough by any objective measure, but because the moment it's done, the moment the thing that was supposed to feel like enough is finally finished, something in you immediately locates the next inadequacy, the next gap, the next place where what you produced falls short of what it should have been. And if you've ever tried to explain this to someone who doesn't experience it this way, you already know how it sounds. You're too hard on yourself. You did great. Why can't you just enjoy it? Which is not helpful, because you already know you're hard on yourself. What you don't know, what almost no one who studies this ever actually explains, is why. Why the bar moves. Why the celebration lasts 10 minutes and then evaporates. Why you can complete something genuinely excellent and still go to bed that night, cataloging everything that was wrong with it. That's what this video is actually about. Now, let's look at what the research on perfectionism consistently shows. And it is not what most people expect. Perfectionism is not primarily a quality standard. It is primarily a self-worth strategy. What that means, specifically, is this. At some point, for most people, early, the environment around you sent a consistent signal. Not always in words. Sometimes in the way praise arrived only after performance. Sometimes in the way mistakes were received, with disappointment, with withdrawal, with a specific kind of silence that taught you something. Sometimes in the comparison to a sibling, a classmate, an imagined version of yourself that was always slightly more than what you were. The signal, however it arrived, was essentially the same. Your value here is conditional. It depends on what you produce, on how well you do, on whether what you bring is good enough to justify the space you're taking up. And your nervous system, which is extraordinarily good at learning the rules of whatever environment it finds itself in, adapted. It built a system, a monitoring system, a constant, low-level process that checks the work before it goes out, checks the sentence before it's spoken, checks the performance before the curtain goes up, and asks every time, is this enough to be safe here? That is what the inner critic is actually doing. It is not a quality control department, it is a protection system. It learned, at some point, that good enough was dangerous. That visible imperfection attracted a specific kind of response that hurt. And so it made the standard higher, and then higher, and then high enough that if you could just clear it, if you could just produce something that couldn't be criticized, maybe the exposure wouldn't come. Maybe you'd be safe. Research on what's called contingent self-worth, the experience of tying your value to specific outcomes or domains, shows that this pattern creates a particular kind of psychological trap. Because when your worth depends on your performance, no performance is ever final. Every achievement is simply the new baseline from which the next evaluation begins. The bar doesn't move because you failed. The bar moves because a static bar would mean you could stop. And the part of you that built this system doesn't believe, at the level where it actually operates, that you're allowed to stop. Here is what that costs. Not in productivity, not in output. Most people running the system are extraordinarily productive. The cost shows up somewhere else entirely. It shows up in the celebration that lasts 10 minutes. The finished project, the one that took months, the one that other people call impressive, that you cannot hold for longer than an afternoon before it becomes, in your own mind, simply what you should have been able to do anyway. It shows up in the way praise lands. Someone tells you the work was excellent, and for a half second, something almost lands. Then the voice starts. They didn't see the part that wasn't right. They're being generous. Wait. If this is what impresses them, maybe their standard is lower than I thought. The compliment finds the gap in you faster than it finds the place you needed it to go. It shows up in the relationships. Because the same mechanism that monitors the work monitors the self. The same voice that says, "This isn't good enough," says, "You aren't good enough." And the people who love you, who see you clearly, who are trying to reach you, run into that voice every time they try to get close. It shows up in the exhaustion, the specific, chronic exhaustion of performing at a standard that never resolves, of working hard enough to be safe and never quite arriving at safe, of being, by most external measures, successful, and still, underneath it all, waiting for the moment someone looks closely enough to see through it. That is the invisible cost of this particular system. And it has been running, quietly, for a long time. Here is the thing that changes when you see it clearly. The bar was never measuring your work. It was measuring your worth. And worth, actual unconditional worth, cannot be earned through performance, which is precisely why the bar never moves. Because the thing it was built to secure was never available through the mechanism that was built to secure it. You have been working towards something that the work was never capable of delivering. That is not a failure of effort. That is a flaw in the architecture. And a flaw in the architecture can be changed. If what you just heard opens something, if some part of you recognize that what you've been looking for can't be found on the other side of a higher standard, there's a practice in the description built specifically for that gap. It's called Self-Compassion as Medicine, 14 Days. Daily audio, a framework that doesn't ask you to believe in yourself first. It builds the internal anchor that the moving bar was always trying to build for you, from the outside in. The link is in the description. There is an objection that arrives here for almost everyone who identifies with what's been described today. It sounds like this. But my standards are the reason I'm successful. If I stop holding myself to this bar, everything I've built falls apart. That objection deserves a real answer, not a dismissal. Interrupting this mechanism does not mean lowering your standards. It does not mean accepting mediocrity, or releasing the care you bring to things, or becoming someone who stops trying. Those things are not the problem. The problem is the belief underneath them. The belief that the quality of the output determines the value of the person who made it. Those are not the same thing. And right now, your nervous system is treating them as though they are identical. The interruption is not a productivity intervention. It's a worth intervention. Here is one concrete place to begin. The next time you finish something, anything, large or small, before the inner critic loads, try asking one specific question. What would I say to someone I care about if they had just done this? Not as an affirmation, not as a performance of self-kindness, just as a genuine question. Because something interesting happens when you ask it. The standard you apply to people you love is almost never the standard you apply to yourself. You can see their effort clearly. You can hold their attempt with warmth, even when the result isn't perfect. You can separate what they made from what they're worth. That separation, that's the thing your system has not learned to do for you. Not because you're incapable of it, because the environment that built this system never modeled it. You were not taught to separate your output from your value. You were taught, in whatever way the teaching arrived, that they were the same. That was not true then. It is not true now. And the part of you that is exhausted from treating them as identical, that part already knows it. The work going forward is not about achieving less. It's about letting what you achieve mean something different, not proof of worth. Evidence of capacity. Those two things feel similar from the outside. From the inside, they are completely different to live. If this opens something you want to go deeper on, the resource in the description was built exactly for this gap. What to do when you understand the mechanism but need a practice that actually builds the internal anchor. Link in the description and pinned comment. And here's something worth sitting with. What's the achievement you worked hardest for? And how long did it actually feel like enough once you had it? Perfectionism was never a character flaw. The version of you that built this system was not making a mistake. It was making the most intelligent adaptation available to it at the time, in an environment where worth felt conditional, where the standard kept the exposure at bay, where good enough was the closest thing to safe. That part of you was not wrong to try to protect you. It just never got the update. It never received the information that the specific danger it was built for may no longer exist in the same form it once did. It is still running the old software. Still treating every deliverable, every interaction, every room you walk into as a referendum on whether you belong here. You have been clearing bars for a long time. You have been doing it largely alone, with whatever tools you had, in a system that was never designed to feel like enough. That is not evidence of someone who isn't trying hard enough. That is evidence of someone who has been working against a mechanism they couldn't fully see. Now you can see it. The bar was measuring your worth. Worth cannot be earned, which is why the bar never moved, and why no amount of clearing it was ever going to be the thing that made you feel like enough. That is not a verdict on you. That is a description of a system. And a system that was learned can be unlearned, not quickly, not through one video or one reframe or one good week, but one interruption at a time, one moment of catching the bar move and knowing clearly what it's actually doing. You are not broken for having built this. You are someone who learned to survive in a particular kind of environment and who is now, finally, learning that survival and safety are not the same thing. The exhaustion you've been carrying is real. The standard you've been held to was never fair. And the person underneath the performance, the one who has been working this hard for this long without ever quite arriving, that person has always been enough. You already know something shifted. That is not nothing. That is exactly where this work begins.